Chess friends, I hope you are doing well. Today, I want to share an incredible and wonderful game where LeelaZero played the King's Gambit against me. I will teach you the King's Gambit at a super high level, along with chess strategies and tactics. So, let's get started without wasting any time. LeelaZero initiated the game with e4, to which I responded with e5. She promptly played f4, initiating the King's Gambit. We played it at the highest level of chess. Typically, Black responds with bishop to c5, pawn to d5, knight to c6 or pawn to d6, all of which are viable moves. Let me illustrate what happens if Black plays bishop to c5 to control the diagonal. You can develop your knight to f3, and after d6, c3 can be played. This sets the stage for the d4 move. In one of our games, after queen e7 was played, indirectly attacking the e4 pawn, White swiftly responded with d4. After exchanges, the e4 pawn became vulnerable, easily captured by the black queen, creating a check. Instead of blocking with the bishop or queen, you can move your king to f2, creating a chess trap that's both superb and wonderful. The bishop can't recapture the pawn on d4 since it's well protected by my pieces. When the bishop retreats to ensure its safety, you can make a cunning move by playing bishop to b5, delivering a check directly to the king. Regardless of your response, my position remains advantageous. After I play rook to e1, you'll notice that your queen will be trapped in the middle of the board since it's pinned to the king, leading to the end of the game. Let's revisit the position. We observed that bishop to c5 isn't feasible, and other seemingly natural moves like knight to c6 and d6 are ineffective due to potential traps. Therefore, I chose to play pawn takes f4, embracing the King's Gambit. In this scenario, White's primary strategy involves playing bishop to c4 to target f7, and developing knights to f3 and c3. Eventually, the knight may advance to e5 or g5 to increase pressure on f7. Furthermore, my queen can easily advance to h5 to mount an attack on f7. This outlines the core strategy of the King's Gambit. Additionally, White can later play pawn to d4 to establish control in the center. After LeelaZero played bishop to c4, I opt for queen h4, checking the king since the knight isn't on f3. After the king moves, some might think of playing bishop c5 to force checkmate in one move. However, I have a cunning move up my sleeve. Instead of defending with a knight or queen on f3, I can play pawn to d4, attacking the bishop on the board. At this point, your bishop should retreat to b6, and then I can play knight to f3, attacking the queen. Some might be tempted to move the queen to g4 rather than back to e7, but if you do move your queen to g4, I can execute a brilliant sacrifice by playing bishop takes f7, sacrificing the bishop, and if you capture it then knight on e5 will come to nightmare your king and queen. If you move your king, I can continue the attack by playing pawn to h3, attacking the queen. The queen has no retreat except g3, however, I can trap your queen completely with knight to f3, followed by knight to e2. The queen has no retreat, and some may be tempted to capture my bishop on f7, but if you do, knight e2 can trap the queen, leaving only one square for her to go. Subsequently, I can play knight e5 check, forking your queen and king, leading to a decisive advantage for me. So, let me make a quote for you. Don't let your current circumstances make you think that you're not capable of creating a new reality for yourself. Returning to the position, bishop to c5 isn't possible, so I played knight to f6 to attack the pawn on e4. My opponent then played knight to f3, targeting my queen. Playing queen to g4 isn't feasible for the same reason, as White can sacrifice the bishop on f7, forcing your king to capture. However, capturing the bishop isn't advisable, as the knight can then move to e5, making your king and queen vulnerable. If you try to move your king, White can respond with h3, pressuring the queen to move again. The queen has no retreat since the knight, bishop, and pawn occupy crucial squares. After the queen moves to g3, I can play knight to c3, followed by knight to e2, completely trapping the queen and leading to a decisive advantage, as in the previous variation. Going back, we've determined that queen g4 isn't feasible, leaving the queen with only one retreat square, h6. Subsequently, after white played knight c3, they're threatening to advance their pawn to d4. Some may consider playing bishop c5 again to activate the bishop's diagonal. However, white can then push their pawn to e5, targeting the knight and creating vulnerability in your position. Later, if black plays knight g4, threatening knight f2, putting pressure on the queen and rook, white can counter with the cunning move knight d5, attacking the c7 pawn. To defend, some might consider playing king d8. Following that, black want to proceed with knight f2. White can make a bold move by playing pawn to d4, directly targeting the bishop. After the bishop retreats, white can capture the pawn on f4, creating a burdensome and vulnerable position for black. Noticing that h3 is impending to trap the knight on g4 while the pawn is also threatened by the bishop, some may consider playing pawn to f6 to create space for the knight. However, white can make a spectacular move with knight to e6 check, attacking the king and queen simultaneously, leading to a decisive advantage. Regardless of where the queen moves, white can easily play queen to e2 to protect the bishop, prepare to push the pawn to d5, and trap the queen. This situation eliminates the possibility of castling for your king, making it highly advantageous for me. Returning to the position, I found that bishop to c5 was unfeasible due to the threat of pawn to d4 and pawn to e5. Therefore, I chose to play pawn to d6 to activate my knight and square bishop, aiming to develop my pieces and castle kingside. After d4 was played in the game, e5 followed, putting the knight under attack. I captured the pawn on e5, and LeelaZero didn't take it with the pawn due to the impending knight to h5 followed by knight to g3 check. That's why LeelaZero opted to capture with the knight instead, activating the bishop and attacking the f7 pawn. While some may consider short side castling, but it wouldn't give a decisive advantage for black, she chose bishop to e6 for a potential advantage. Because of you dare to capture my light square bishop, it will allow me to castle later and I will get the open f-file, which is the reason why LeelaZero responded with pawn to d5, targeting the bishop first. Despite this, I sacrificed my bishop by playing knight to d7 to attack the knight on e5. Though you might be tempted to capture with your knight, my bishop on e6 can recapture. After LeelaZero played queen to e2 to protect the knight, I moved my knight to h5, setting up a potential fork on g3, targeting the queen, king, and rook. If you dare to capture the knight with your pawn, then the rook on h1 will be vulnerable. That's why she first deal with this strategy by capturing the bishop on e6. After the knight g3 check happens in the game, the king moves up to e2, I mean f2. At this juncture, white actually played h takes g3, sacrificing the rook right away. After the king moves up, I capture the pawn on the g3 square. Some of you might think of capturing the pawn on g3, but it will lead to a decisive advantage for black. The diagonal will be open, where the queen can easily swoop in to join forces and attack the king. Therefore, queen h4 check will be lethal, and after king f3 happens, black will capture the knight. After the capture happens, black can easily capture the bishop on the c4 square, making the position completely vulnerable. Black will be completely winning the game, as they are material up. So, going back to the variation, instead of capturing the pawn on g3, Leela played king f3. After queen h5 check happened in the game, some might think of playing king e3, which is just garbage as black can give another check on g5 square with their queen. After the king moves up to d4 to protect the knight on e5 square, black can swiftly march a heavier attack by playing c5 check, forcing the king to move, and then finally, knight f6 check will be checkmate. The king on the center of the board will be completely lost, and the game will be over. So, let me motivate you by making a quote. Some people are like clouds. When they disappear, it's a brighter day. Going back to the position, Leela didn't play king to e3, creating a vulnerable situation for her. She decided to play knight to g4 to block the attack, and after I capture the pawn on e6, the file opens up where the rook is coming on f8. Some might consider playing bishop f4, but it's garbage as e5 can kick out the bishop first. Leela captures the e-pawn, and after rook check and bishop f4 happen in the game, g5 can come. but it's not so good because knight d5 can pressure your bishop on e7. Which is why I play castle to sacrifice my bishop. Leela accepts my bishop sacrifice because she appreciates my gifts. I decided to go with g5 to attack the bishop on f4, after bishop e6 to pin down the knight on the king. Rook takes f4, king e3 and queen e8 happened in the game to attack these pieces. Some might consider queen takes g5, a natural looking move to attack the rook with king and queen. However, black can launch a heavier attack by playing rook f7, astonishingly pinning the bishop to the king. After queen h6 to protect the bishop, black strengthens their attack with rook takes e7, targeting the bishop. Your position becomes vulnerable with the king in the center of the board. Going back to the position, LeelaZero played knight d5, aiming at the rook. I captured her queen, and after she captured it, my king slide followed by rook d1, the knight on d7 is pinned, and the bishop puts pressure on it. So, what do you think black should consider in this position? I first executed a strategy by moving my pawn to h5, attacking the knight. You can see that the knight has no retreating squares, except one. However, knight h6 would lead to the rook coming to f6, making the knight and bishop positions vulnerable. After knight e5 happened in the game, I played a brilliant and cunning move. The knight on d7 is under attack, so I executed a mind-blowing strategy by moving my rook to e4, sacrificing it completely. After that, knight c5 follows to give her a check, and the rook on d1 falls due to a discovered attack after the king moves. White has 3 minor pieces while I have 1, but I have a rook, which is astonishing and incredible for me. After c6, the bishop moves back to attack the pawn, and the rook comes to b1. Leela played b4, and some might think of capturing the pawn on b4, but it would be completely losing as she can capture the pawn on c6. Subsequently, the knight can arrive at c6, supporting the king and rook, and she will completely win the game. At this point, we saw that rook takes b4 is not viable, which is why I played pawn to g4 to kick out the bishop. You might be tempted to play bishop to e2, but it's a completely rubbish and garbage move as black can play rook to g1, attacking the pawn. These 3 beasts and connected passed pawns can create a much weaker position for the white king, leading to a loss. Instead of moving back the bishop, Leela executed a higher attack by capturing the pawn on c6. After that, she immediately captured my knight on c5, trying to equalize the position. After rook g1 to attack the pawn, she should move back her king to a4, but she decided to play knight takes c6, which was a blunder move. Because after that, knight d4 happens, and I win the pawn on g2. My 2 pawns on the g-file and 1 pawn on h5 are creating a problematic situation for white. These connected passed pawns are just winning for me, and your 2 knights can't do anything. She tried to give me a check, but after a couple of moves later, knight d4 rook to d2 and king c8 happened in the game. At this juncture, some of you might consider playing king to e4 in order to safeguard your knights, but I can easily capture your knight on e4. After that, you can see that my pre-connected pawns on the G and H files can create a much problematic situation, and you are unable to stop them. Your 1 knight cannot stop them. I will win the game completely. So at this point, LeelaZero tried to execute a higher attack by playing knight to e7 check, and after that, king e6 happened, and she sacrificed her knight on d4 completely. After a couple of moves later, she played knight f5 followed by knight g3, and again, a couple of moves later, I tried to push my pawn, and I played rook d6 check. The king moves out, and after a couple of moves later, it is a completely winning game for me. Slowly but surely, I advance my pawn on a4, moving out the rook. And the knight is coming on the way to d4 and c to try to protect the square. Gradually, I promote my pawn to the a1 square with a queen, and after a couple of moves later, you can see that my king and queen arrive and give a checkmate on b2. What a wonderful and amazing game. I hope you enjoyed the game very much. If so, then don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel. Wishing you all the best. Bye bye. See ya.